Mathrubhumi International Festival of Letters 2018. We have Mr. Mihir Bose in conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
This is a wonderful book, which I first read on the PDF, and now I've got it on hardcover. This is the book in which you say, here I am a Hindu, I go to the temple, I worship, but I'm not Hindutva. So this is, would it be right to say, this is soft Hindutva? Go to the temple, but don't bring the temple into politics.
In many ways, these are ideas that have been prefigured in my books for the last 30 years. The great Indian novel, about 3 decades ago, with its emphasis on Dharma, my novel Riot, talking about the Hindu-Muslim violence leading up to the Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid issue, my book India from Midnight to the Millennium 20 years ago, in which I talked about some of these themes of Hinduism versus Hindutva, obviously much more briefly, but the thoughts are very much there. So in many ways, this book is a product of an adult lifetime of reflection and an entire lifetime of experience and observation. Many of us have grown up with a certain Hinduism which we don't recognize in the Hinduism of contemporary political discourse. We are suddenly finding, as Hindus who have had a certain set of beliefs, that our ideas of Hinduism, which we took for granted growing up in Hindu households across India, saw practiced by other Hindus we knew and met, is suddenly distorted into some sort of faith of delirious fanaticism and Muslim bashing. A faith in which human beings are assaulted in the name of protecting the cow. A faith in which, honestly, and since this is an analogy that will appeal to you, the adherence to the faith is equated more or less or resembles nothing so much as the team loyalty of the British football hooligan. You know, my team is better than your team and I'll hit you on the head if you disagree. That's not Hinduism. That never was the Hinduism of the vast majority of us who grew up in this country. And I felt the time had come to say so. You know, having been caricatured for years as quote-unquote anti-Hindu and pseudo-secular, not secular, but S-I-C-K-U-L-A-R, which is the favored term of abuse of the Hindutva trolls, I had, for a long time believed that religion being something between you and your maker or your idea of the divine is something you practice quietly at home and didn't show outside. It would almost seem unseemly to do so. But when the public perception of who you are is so completely being traduced by these attacks, I thought the time had come to actually come right forward and say, you're wrong, this is what I believe in, and it's not what you claim I ought to believe in.
Why do you think that in India, the India that I grew up in compared to the India now, what was considered rather fantastic ideas seem to have become mainstream? But now we have people saying that the Hindus had atom bombs and thermonuclear devices and sent missions to the moon and elsewhere in the days of Ram Rajya. How has this come about? Why has this become almost mainstream?
Well, because frankly, those who have entertained such far-fetched and frankly absurd ideas are now in power. Power has an amazing effect in terms of your ability to command an audience. And now that those who've come to power are the ones who believe such things, our Prime Minister has made a speech in which he said that the sight of Ganesha's head on a human body is proof that India was a world expert in plastic surgery. Now, the irony is that India was the world's pioneer in plastic surgery. But anybody who knows the approximate size of the smallest imaginable elephant head and the elephant neck, elephant head, and the largest imaginable human neck knows that two cannot be made to fit by the most adept plastic surgeon. Now, the problem with these fantastic statements, where you take an extraordinary idea and reduce it to its basic literal, is that you end up in a situation where the actual achievements of Indian plastic surgery, Shushruta was the world's first recorded surgeon. The oldest surgical instruments found anywhere in the world are 2,000 years old and were found in India. the first recorded plastic surgery operation, a rhinoplasty, was conducted in ancient India. All of these scientifically verifiable facts become discredited by the absurd fantasies spoken by those who are in power today. Similarly, all this talk about Pushpak Viman, these planes flying. We had the Indian Science Congress, one of the most reputable scientific conferences in the world for the last 6 decades, being reduced to a joke with a twit sponsored by the ruling forces coming and arguing that India actually had jet planes 2,000 years ago. So this kind of ahistorical, unscientific approach gains credibility from the credulity of those in power.
Well, of course, you share with Narendra Modi one thing. Both of you are admirers of Vivekananda. Now, is it possible that...
I think the one difference is I've actually read Vivekananda.
Yeah, no, you've read Vivekananda. But is it possible that one of the problems, and I'm not saying this frivolously, is that people just take bits of Vivekananda that they want? The bit of Vivekananda that always appealed to me was when he said, you will get closer to God by playing football than by reading the Bhagavad Gita, which explains my devotion to football. So maybe is a solution that Narendra Modi ought to be playing football. I mean, I don't know how good he would be, but I can see him as quite a thuggish defender, but, you know, who knows. But, you know...
Well, we're going to give him a lot to defend because, you know, so far he's been very much an aggressive player. We would like to respond to that, push him back on his defense.
But do you... you've written this book, you say this is not a political statement in the sense, but this is a soft Hindutva in order to claim the temple back for the Congress party, is it not?
I forgot to respond to that provocative phrase. You gave me so much on that initial question. I reacted to most of it, not the soft Hindutva. No, I reject that idea completely. This is not soft Hindutva because Hindutva embodies a certain idea of Hinduism and a certain view of the world and a certain idea of the place of Hinduism in Indian politics, which we reject utterly. At the risk of playing with words, mine is Hinduism, not Hindutva. So it is not soft Hindutva. It is in fact saying that Hindutva is not Hinduism because the Hinduism that I have known, summarized, described, substantiated with quotations from the scriptures and from the great souls and great teachers of Hinduism is a religion of acceptance, not a religion of bigotry. It's a religion of ahimsa and satya, not a religion of distortion and violence. All of these arguments, and therefore, when we say, you say going to temples is soft Hindutva, I say no, going to temples, as Rahul Gandhi did in the Gujarat elections, is a way of neutralizing the Hindu narrative. We didn't want to abdicate the space to the BJP to say, look, we are the only good Hindus, vote for us. We want to say, look, we are good Hindus in a better way, in a different way, in a more inclusive way than those guys are. But now that we've got the Hindu issue out of the way, they go to temples, we go to temples. Now we can push that out of the way. Let's talk economics. Let's talk development. Let's ask you, is your life better for having been ruled by the BJP? And so in a way, it's a way of neutralizing the Hindu argument rather than giving a soft version of it.
But the problem is that once a people or a section of the people are convinced they have lost out, it's very difficult to convince them they haven't lost out. We've seen this in Trump. We saw it in Brexit, in the UK where I live, that you convince a section of the people you've lost out. And I remember coming back to India in the 80s and seeing a slogan on the wall at Kemp's Corner in Mumbai, the town I grew up in, you know, Mrs. Gandhi saved the Hindus. And I thought, what is wrong with the Hindus? They are the majority. I mean, how do you do that? It's very difficult to reconvince a people that they haven't lost out, that their religion is not in danger.
Fair enough. I mean, the truth is that there's been an assiduous propaganda about Hinduism and danger and so on for a few decades now, and some people have been convinced by it. To my mind, the only effective counter-argument is whatever you may have believed about things like quote-unquote minority appeasement, which always was a slightly silly thing to say because if the minorities have been so much appeased, why are they still in such bad shape? Take the Muslim community. Look at the Sachar Commission report about the rather poor condition of that community and ask what has all these so-called policies of appeasement got them. I don't think that you can truthfully make a very credible, rational argument for that view. But even if you had once believed it, let's shift the argument slightly and say, all right, so you feel you were hard done by. Have you been any better done by under the BJP's rule?
But it's not helped by your party. After all, Nehru's grandson Rajiv Gandhi amended the constitution after the Supreme Court judgment on the Banu case, and your party is now opposing the bill going through Parliament about the triple talaq. So this is vote bank politics now.
No, wait a minute. You got it wrong. On Shah Banu, I'm on your side. And my book, India from Midnight to Millennium, lays out very clearly my objections and my disappointment in what Rajiv Gandhi felt it necessary to do at that time. But on triple talaq, our position is not against the bill. No one is in favor of triple talaq in this country, not even most of the Muslims I know. In fact, no Muslim I know has said to me he's in favor of triple talaq. It's not a particular... Many Muslims who are very conservative Muslims say this is a distortion of Islam. The problem that the Congress party has is that it seems to have been drafted very hastily with two major questions still unanswered, which we raised in the Lok Sabha debate, which the BJP was able to ignore because of their crushing majority, but they can't ignore in the Rajya Sabha, and that's why we're saying let's refer it to a committee. The first question is, what is the precedent we are setting in ensuring that a civil problem becomes criminalized? Why are we putting ourselves in a position where a civil offense leads to a criminal punishment? And there is no good answer to this. There is no other civil offense you can think of that causes a criminal sentence. So we need to understand, first of all, whether the government has thought through why this is necessary, and secondly, whether the government is conscious of the precedent it's setting for other kinds of civil problems. The second question is, why does a woman object to her husband getting rid of her with triple talaq? Because she is not ready to be divorced. She wants some more time to try and save the marriage, to protect her children. She still needs support from her husband and so on. Now, you're saying on the one hand you want to protect the woman who doesn't want to be divorced in an instant. On the other hand, you're throwing her husband in jail where he clearly will not support her or her children or keep the family together. What's the logic in that? So these are the two objections we've raised before. We said, please think this through, either give us credible answers or have a committee of parliament. Most legislation goes through committee. It's relatively unusual for a law of this magnitude with social implications to be brought straight to the floor without having gone through committee. All we're saying is, study it in committee and we'll vote on it up. We are not defending triple talaq.
Shashi, I want you to speculate on this, because I know the numbers are not available. I think we would all like to believe that the majority of Hindus believe in Hinduism as against Hindutva. But if an opinion poll were conducted today, what do you think the results would be? My own feeling would be that most people are veering or have already veered to Hindutva, because there's a lot of antagonism to Muslims. There's a feeling of victimhood. All these things may be unjustified, but they are there. And then, secondly, what can be done to counter this?
Well, I think, when you speak of an opinion poll, it also depends on where the poll is conducted. A lot of the opinion polls in this country are a bit skewed in the sense that they're much more in the urban areas, which paradoxically ought to be where people are better read, have more access to more sources of information. But paradoxically, this is in fact the part of the country, the urban India, where the BJP is stronger. Whereas if you look at rural India, where people just live without thinking about these things too much, there's a great deal more of acceptance of difference, the key that Vivekananda preached, than there perhaps is in places where people have thought about it. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, as the old line goes. So I would not hazard a guess as to where the opinion polls might go. But if you explained in two sentences what we meant by Hindutva and what we meant by Hinduism, my suspicion is that a majority of Hindus would still go for Hinduism. It's just that there has been a very successful conflation of the two. There are many in the Hindutva movement who basically say all that Hindutva means is Hindu-ness. Therefore, we are talking about the authentic way of being Hindu. And that, unfortunately, has fooled a lot of people. So my book is a first salvo. And the salvo will certainly get stronger when it's translated into Indian languages, as it will be. Already a Hindi translation is being worked on, a Malayalam translation is being worked on, a Telugu translation is being worked on. So there will be a way of reaching out to ordinary Indians to say, indeed, let's understand the difference and let's decide which way we want to go. Let's conduct the poll after all those translations have been published.
In your previous books, you talk about Nehruvian secularism, and I think you are a staunch supporter of Nehruvian secularism. But in this particular text, I think you will talk about pluralism. So which do you prefer, secularism or pluralism? Or India just needs a secular state or a pluralist state?
No, I've been consistent on this in that I have argued that secularism, strictly speaking, is and has always been a misnomer. Because if you look up an English dictionary, secularism specifically means the absence of religion. Any enterprise from which religion is wholly absent can be called a secular enterprise. Whereas even from Nehru's day onwards, whether he personally was secular or not, he was. The fact is that the state was actually promoting pluralism. Nehru himself came up with the metaphor of the palimpsest. I don't know if you know what a palimpsest is. If you go and write on a wall and then I come and write on top of what you have written without erasing what you've written, and she comes and writes on top of what I have written without erasing what either of us has written, and then he comes and writes on top of what she has written and so on, the net result of all these writings, one on top of the other, is a palimpsest. And that is what Nehru said India was, which is in fact pluralism. It means we all exist, no one effaces the other, nor does the absence of faith actually prevail. Now, we have got entangled into a needless argument on this issue because once you get to the Indian languages, in particular Sanskrit and Hindi, there is the criticism of Nehruvian secularism on the grounds that secularism means dharma nirpekshata. There is distancing yourself from dharma, which is impossible literally for a Hindu because a Hindu is enjoined to live according to his dharma. And therefore, that what we should have been talking about is panth nirpekshata, that is, distancing yourself from any particular religion or sect. To my mind, that was actually what we always were. But because we use the English word secularism, we left ourselves open to this line of argument, and therefore I've suggested let's emphasize pluralism. 20 years ago in India from Midnight to the Millennium, I said the same thing. It is true that in my biography of Nehru, I stuck to the word secularism because that was, after all, it was a description of the 4 pillars of Nehruvianism, and secularism was his pillar. But I still think that from the start, if he had preferred to use the word pluralism, he might actually have been able to change the discourse from what it's instead been reduced to in our country.
Today you stated that in a state, no religion should be ostensibly given more importance. But what about in the case of a state like India, where so much of our culture and our heritage is derived from religion? What would you suggest that the state should do in terms of a condition like this?
So I have no difficulty with the religious influences upon culture because it's what in some ways makes us distinctively Indian. The example I gave here earlier of smashing a coconut on a ship when every Western country smashes a bottle of champagne is actually a manifestation of Hinduism as culture rather than as religion. Culture is not a problem. The problem is only when there is a religion or a religious community that is being particularly privileged or favored. Is it, for example, wrong that the Rashtrapati throws an iftar dinner during Ramadan, during Eid, I beg your pardon, well, during Ramadan, during the fasting months when they break the fast to the end? In our country, right until the BJP came to power, both the president and the prime minister would throw an iftar dinner. Now, under the BJP, they've stopped doing so. I would challenge them and say, this is actually culture. This is no different from smashing a coconut. Or you check into a 5-star hotel and some pretty girl comes and puts a tilak on your forehead. She isn't marrying you. She's just welcoming you to the hotel. That's also culture. It's not religion. So my point is, there's a great value in these kinds of symbolic depictions of culture. It makes us, in a sense, feel more rooted in our Indianness. But it can be Hindu, it can be Muslim, it can even be certain kinds of Christian habits. The role of the traditional Kerala lamp in every Kerala church is quite striking. You don't find anything like it in Western Christianity. That is very much an Indian cultural adaptation by Christianity in India. So you can find all of these examples throughout our country, and my own view is that is the celebration of pluralism I'm all about. I don't think we need to be godless in order to be secular in the Indian sense or pluralist in my sense of the term. We can all respect our own faiths while accepting it's the private business of each individual how they choose to worship. And at the same time, it's also the private business of those who choose not to worship anyone at all. The state will not consider that either an advantage or a disability. You lead your own life. Let the state then have an opportunity to treat all citizens equally. My big worry right now with what's going on is the danger that the approach of those in power today, the very people who would divide us into Ramzadeh and Haramzadeh, the very people who speak about, who say that, if you don't agree with Mr. Modi, you should go to Pakistan. I mean, why Pakistan? If you want to send your enemies far away, suggest Canada, for God's sake, But you're suggesting Pakistan to send a message. I fear that all of these things will in fact reduce India into a Hindu Pakistan. And I want to stand up through this book and through my other writings and speeches against the idea of Hindi, Hindu, Hindutva as an all-embracing, narrowly defining and limiting slogan that I think impoverishes both our public discourse and our social and cultural values.
Well, thank you very much.